So in the last few series of lectures, we've been talking about supply and we've been talking about demand, each separately. In this video, we want to examine what happens when supply and demand interact. So over here on the right, I have a market supply and demand schedule. And over on the left are those values from the supply and demand schedule plotted to get supply and demand curves. And obviously there's one point that has some significance in this plot, which is where supply and demand are equal. And we call this point the equilibrium. And so the price and quantity associated with the equilibrium point, we just call the equilibrium quantity and equilibrium price. And so in this case, the equilibrium price is 3, which corresponds to a quantity supplied of 15. And we can see that in our supply and demand schedule, when the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied, that gives us our equilibrium price. So let's say the price is $5 instead of the equilibrium price of 3. Well, draw a line across and then draw some lines down from your demand and supply curves, and that will tell you the corresponding supply and demand at that price. So in this case, the demand curve tells us that at a price of $5, the market is demanding about 7 units of the good. So we'll label this Q sub D for quantity demanded. However, the supply curve is telling us that at $5, the market is supplying 25 units. Quantity supplied. So in this case, quantity supplied is much larger than quantity demanded. In fact, it's we've got 25 quantity supplied and about 7 quantity demanded, which means we have a surplus of 18 units in the market. And this is less than ideal because that means we have 18 units that were supplied but nobody wants and are just sitting idle in our market. So this outcome is not very efficient. Graphically, our surplus is represented by this distance here between the demand and supply curve at the $5 level. So alternatively, we can consider a equilibrium price below the market price or the equilibrium price. So let's say the price is $2. We can do the same thing, find where that price intersects both curves, and then drop a line down to the x-axis. So in this case, the supply curve is telling us at $2, 10 units are going to be supplied, but the demand curve is saying at $2, about 17 units are going to be demanded. So in this case, quantity demanded is larger than quantity supplied. Specifically, we're over demanding by 7 units, or we have a shortage of 7 units. And again, graphically, the shortage is represented by this distance here. And again, this situation is not efficient because we have people who want units of the good that are not being supplied. So now let's look at why we typically don't see shortages or surpluses. So let's say we're running a surplus of this amount. Well, at this point, suppliers have too many units. They want to get rid of them. And so to increase sales, they lower price, which in turn decreases the surplus, right? Our surplus got smaller. But they can keep increasing profits by increasing sales if they keep lowering price until they get to the equilibrium value here. At this point, they've sold everything they have, and so they don't have any incentive to lower prices to keep increasing sales. And the same logic applies for a shortage. Here we're running a large shortage of goods. And so suppliers see a profit opportunity. They can increase price since they're selling out of their goods. They increase price to increase profitability, which in turn lowers demand, right? As prices rise, demand lowers and the shortage decreases. And we keep doing that until eventually we reach the equilibrium price. So the point is, absent any mechanism to maintain these surpluses or shortages, right? If the market is allowed to do as it wishes, shortages and surpluses tend to dissipate quickly and the equilibrium price is found. So this concept goes back to one of the fundamental principles of economics, which is that markets are typically a good way to allocate resources. What I mean by that is typically the market will ensure that there are no shortages or surpluses, which is exactly what you want, right? Everybody is selling what they have and everybody's buying what is being sold. And the main mechanism by which this happens is by prices. So quickly, I'll summarize what we've learned so far in this module. First, we have demand, and we know demand slopes downward because as prices increase, the quantity we're willing to purchase decreases, right? And then we have supply, which slopes upward. And supply slopes upward because as prices increase, it becomes more profitable to be producing and selling that good, and so the quantity supplied also increases. Right? And those two things are known as the law of demand, which implies demand slopes downward. And the analog is the law of supply, which again implies supply slopes upward. And supply and demand interact in the market to find the equilibrium price. Right? And the equilibrium price, to recap, it's the price where the quantity supplied equals the quantity demanded. And the equilibrium price is self-adjusting, right? We tend to, if we let the market do its thing, we find that because if we're above the equilibrium price, we have a surplus and prices tend to fall towards the equilibrium price. And if we are below the equilibrium price, we have a shortage and prices tend to rise towards the equilibrium price. So that's this module in a nutshell. Again, everything in this module is really, really important for the rest of the course. So again, if you don't understand something in this module, come seek help before moving on to the next module.